today we have special guest on the show, Justin Latta of Indians Baseball Insider. Before we dive into the news of the day and talk some stuff, Justin's covered for many different sites over the years. We've had a lot of fun interactions. I think we started probably interacting in AA together. That's where a lot of us got our feet wet, it feels like, at various points in time. I often agree with Justin, so that just proves to me he's very smart, right? That's how it goes. But, agree or disagree, always awesome person, always very cordial, always very full of information. Before we get too much more into the show, Justin, tell them where they can find your articles, find your Twitter, all that stuff.
Yeah, we're at indiansinsider.com and can follow the site official_RBI. You can follow me at JL_baseball. If you like a lot of baseball tweets.
And I hope if they are watching the show, they do. Otherwise, it's I don't know why they're watching, but thank you for doing it. Even if you're not a baseball fan, thank you. So the news of the day is DeMarlo Hale has been announced as bench coach for the Indians. Brad Mills is still going to be with the organization in a lesser role. Mills and Tito were very close, and that's why he got that job. Hale actually in Boston replaced Mills as bench coach. And the other fun fact about Hale is back in 2010, he was a finalist for the Toronto Blue Jays managerial job, along with John Farrell and Sandy Alomar Jr. So a lot of ties to coaches in this organization. Interesting from the perspective of, I think some people assume that Sandy Alomar would get the bench job. Instead, he's a first base coach still. I think some people thought he'd get some interviews this offseason. He did not. So read into that what you will. But they have a very experienced bench crew, which is 100% necessary when you just look at Tito and his unknown health. So if nothing else, they're getting a very experienced bench crew. Barreling through the news, since we have Justin here, I thought maybe we'll lead off with some prospect talk. Yesterday's show, we had a lot of talk about the players added to the Rule 5, 5 names there. I don't know if you had a particular player maybe you'd want to talk about from that grouping, or if there was anyone who you were kind of surprised that was left off or you wish had not been left off.
I think the one person everyone was surprised or disappointed among the prospect community, I think yourself included, was Jose Fermin. I think that's the only guy you can look at and kind of worry about. I know Luis Oviedo might be on that list, but he had a pretty up and down 2019, and he obviously didn't pitch last year. So neither of those guys got taken in the 2019 rule draft. So hard to believe that they would be taken in the 2020 rule 5 draft. But I'm kind of surprised they added all 5. Like I had kind of predicted they would add that these are the 5 guys that they should add, but I was kind of surprised they actually went ahead and added all 5 because now they're at 40. And I was on the fence about whether they would keep Eli Morgan because, his carrying traits are a 70 grade changeup and plus command. And Carlos Vargas is the other guy who hasn't pitched above short season ball yet, has some really nasty stuff. But again, he hasn't pitched above a short season. That's very, very rare to keep on a 40-man roster. I know they did that with Danny Salazar after he had Tommy John, but I think at that point he had been in the Carolina League at least. So this is a pretty steep climb for Vargas to go from short season A in terms and then being on the 40-man roster. Also a nice salary bump for him too, I'm sure.
Oh, definitely. It's hard to find 2 more diametrically opposed pitchers than maybe Eli Morgan and Carlos Vargas. As you were talking about them, I'm like, Morgan, the epitome of maybe safe. I mean, I'm a Morgan guy. I've been very honest in that. I think there's got to be a role for him somewhere in relief, maybe not as a starter. I know they still believe in him as a starter, and they've always stuck to that with everyone I've ever talked to in the organization. But I mean, the changeup is, to me, the best changeup in the system. And then Vargas, who, I mean, I've been hearing hopes, wishes, and dreams on for the last 2 years just based on that stuff. So it is, as you were talking, it just made me think of how opposed they were. I had 4 out of 5. I thought maybe they'd leave a spot open. I still haven't done the research like I should, but I was trying to think if the last player they took was that first baseman from Texas like 5 years ago. They just don't seem to have any interest in the Rule 5 draft.
That was Chris McGinnis here, right? I forgot about that. That seems like many moons ago. I want to say that was 2012, maybe 2011.
That could be. Well, the best part was I pulled that out and got Texas first baseman McGinnis from the top of my head on Friday's show. So the fact you confirmed it there makes me feel pretty good or pretty bad that I store that type of information in my head for a guy who they did not keep either. So it's, it is interesting as the team, everything's going to come up with Anthony Santander. It was a very odd situation. And if anything happens and Fermin comes together, I'm sure that will come up. But I agree with you. I think the fact that he wasn't taken last year probably emboldened them to not protect him this year. In general, a lot of people know the big names who are close or the guys they just got in the trades. Who are some prospects that maybe aren't, those top 4 to 5 or some recently acquired ones or recent draft picks? Who are some guys that fans should know about that we're not hearing as much of, or some guys that maybe you're hip to because you do spend so much time talking to people and watching these games?
Fermin offensively is one of my favorites for sure. I mean, position player prospects outside of middle infielders, as you know, is kind of sparse. Like they're weak at first base, even though they have some guys down the pipeline like John Kenzie Noel and Joe Naranjo who are interesting. I don't know, position players are hard to nail down. Like everyone knows who George Valera is out of the hat as far as position players. Like the guys you hear about every day, like Tyler Freeman and Aaron Bracho and Gabriel Rodriguez, and now Gabriel Arias, all those guys are on everyone's radars, and that's going to make up the hopeful core going forward offensively, even if some of those guys move off of shortstop or other positions they're at right now. I would say pitching-wise, one of my favorites has been Cody Morris. I'm a little bit concerned that they're going to go the way of the bullpen with him. He was actually listed as a reliever at Fall Instructs last month, which kind of caught me off guard. They were super careful about his innings in 2019. I'm sure you watched a lot of him or heard a lot about him and at South Carolina the year they made the run to I think it was the Super Regional. They made it to the finals. I can't remember how far they made it, but he pitched a ton of innings, if I remember right. And he didn't pitch at all in 2018 when they drafted him. So 2019 was his first year pitching in the pros, and he looked really good. I mean, he had a really, really good doesn't have a lot of movement, but it's got, enough velocity to play, and he's gotten good enough command of it. And I like how much promise the changeup has. So I think he's got keep him in the rotation, but I think the concern is the pitches holding up and his velocity holding up, turning the lineup over a third time, going 6 or 7 innings. So they were super careful with him in 2019, not doing that too often. So I am concerned that he's going to move into the bullpen, but you move into the bullpen, he's got a really nice future too. I mean, it's a 3-pitch pitcher who all 3 pitches to me are at least fringe average, if not a touch better, and he's got decent command. So he's for sure one of my pitching sleepers. And Eli Morgan is a guy name you mentioned that we just talked about that really does realize how good his changeup is and the kind of role he can profile. And I'm trying to think of any other pitchers at the top of my head, but yeah, position players are, they are what they are. Bo Naylor, those guys, those are the core guys, and they need to make it. I think they should be on everyone's radar.
If I can throw you my helium or potential helium hitting prospect is, speaking of Naylor, is Brian Lavastida. I feel like a guy that just based on 2019, like I wasn't sure when they drafted him. I did not have much intel there, and I was kind of surprised by his overall cost. But I thought last year he did enough to at least be a name where you have to pay attention to him in 2021.
Yeah, and he's come a long way. He didn't start catching until I want to say the end, or he only went to junior college for 1 year, and I think he switched to catcher, only in junior college. So he hasn't been catching that long. He doesn't look that bad for a catcher who hasn't been doing it a long time. And I mean, he's going to be a bad first player, but he's a strong physical kid, right? And he looks like he has an idea of what he's doing at the plate. Doesn't strike out a lot, so kind of fits their profile. It'll be interesting to see how he moves up along with Naylor. And some people really like Gainer Diaz. He had a really tough time at Mahoning Valley in 2019 when he got there. Another name too that was in that trade, Owen Miller. I think there's a lot of people who are split on Owen Miller, from what I can tell. Is some people really like the contact skills because there's some Jose Fermin, some Jose Ramirez to his game, but he's a little bit older. He's a college prospect, and he's probably a second baseman who's going to moonlight as a shortstop but I wouldn't be surprised to see him playing second base this year. And he wasn't added to 40 because he doesn't need to be until next year, which complicates things. Because I don't know if you had a chance to take a look at the 40-man roster stipulations for 2021, but it's absolutely insane. But yeah, Owen Miller is another guy that probably didn't get added to the 40 that should be on people's radar that might play in 2021.
Yeah, he's interesting because it's like he's one of those players I am high on. I'm in that group, but I can also see some Jake Bauers there to a degree where it's like I don't know about secondary traits. It is a lot about contact and strikeout rates, and it is being that polished, advanced college hitter. And there's I've seen talking to people over the years. There's conspiracy theories afoot. And the two of them are, one is to take that college player and push them aggressively quickly to increase trade value. And the other is to do the same thing with extremely young players, a la Jake Bauers, when he was he was always significantly younger than his level. And that if you can even be above average bat as a very young player, or if you can be an advanced hitter as one of the older ones, then you can raise a trade value. And I mean, I like Owen Miller quite a bit, but as this third round guy from a small school, I don't think anyone suspected that he was going to be a top 10 prospect or on the fringes. And I mean, it was interesting to see that he is higher rated often in the San Diego system than he is in Cleveland's. I don't know if that is people retroactively changing grades, or is it just based on how you look at it? Is a very low ceiling, but he's fascinating because I can see a world where Tyler Freeman and him are essentially the same player. Like, that is a very easy outcome for both. I mean, it would be a bit disappointing for Freeman, but I don't think it is beyond the realm of possibility where you could have two above average hitting second baseman with both of them.
Yeah, I don't have as much intel on Miller, obviously, because he's new and I haven't really seen him outside of going back and watching some highlights and a couple other games. But you're right. It would be definitely disappointing if he and Freeman end up having the same outcomes, just because, Freeman was a prep player and I think he's added a lot of strength. A lot of my faith in Tyler Freeman's ability to max out his potential is driven by, the work ethic and the makeup. And I think I've heard similar things I know in Miller, but I mean, we've seen Freeman up close or heard about him. So, I'm still a big believer in Tyler Freeman reaching the upper ends of his outcome, I think. But, it wouldn't shock me in 2021 if you saw Tyler Freeman at shortstop and Owen Miller at second base. I mean, I think that's a very real possibility. That would be aggressive for Tyler Freeman, but they may, force the move.
No, I concur with you. Speaking of like work ethic and just great traits like that, and the players that work very hard and just have all of the right character traits. There was a player who I think to some was a bit of a shock that wasn't added onto the Rule 5, and I'd be remiss to not talk to you about Will Benson, who, by every account I ever heard, one of the greatest people you could hope to interact with. I've always heard just over the moon scouting reports on personality and work ethic, and the physical tools are there. But I guess some people think I'm being a little too critical, where I'm like, I don't know if he's even a top 30 prospect for me anymore. When he was drafted, that hit tool was, I thought, a future 30, maybe 40 at best. Do you think the hit tool's ever going to get there with him? Or do you think we're just, no matter how good physical tools are and how good he is and how hard he works as a person, that swing is just, in the pitch recognition with it?
It's long. It's a long swing. He's a big kid. And that's what happens. I don't know. I don't know how Aaron Judge does it. Like, I don't know what the different mechanics are, because they're not. He and Aaron Judge are not dissimilar players. Like, Aaron Judge is a huge dude, and I know Benson was a prep player, and Judge went to Fresno. So I don't know how long his swing was in college and what he learned. And I think Judge is a very different player as a pro than he was as a prospect. I don't know if you saw. I didn't see him as a prospect, but I've just seen a lot of people talk about the differences from him as a prospect to him now. And Benson's on like his third or fourth swing change. It might be third. but he's just gone through so many different, setups in the box, different loads, just so many different things. And it worked finally in 2019 at Lake County. And it wasn't like he was old for the level, right? Like he was 20 years old. So that's about on pace to what you want in Lake County. And then he just kind of went back to everything that fell apart in Lynchburg when he got promoted. I don't think you're wrong. I think it's a future 30 hit tool. I really do. I think like he's got good plate discipline. He's not going to swing at bad pitches. I think he does a good job of holding the strike zone as a hitter. I don't know if it's an issue of picking up spin. I just think he swings and misses a lot in the zone. Like that's his biggest problem is there are pitches that are in the hitting zone for him and he just can't connect with. It's a long swing, and outside of just more swing changes, I don't know, what he does to fix that. I hope he does, because like you said, he's a great kid. He's great to interview, great head on his shoulders, great family, very charismatic, great teammate, and he's fun to watch play. He gets the ball as far as anybody I've ever seen. Like Nick Weglars and Bobby Bradley are the only guys I think compare.
Nick Weglar's reference. I appreciate that.
What's that?
Nick Weglar's reference. I appreciate that.
Yeah, that was one of the guys that I was sure was going to be a future DH for the Indians, and I can definitely take that in the L column for myself. But Benson plays a great outfield. He runs like he does he has so many tools in the toolbox. He just needs to be able to hit the baseball consistently. And it's like I was watching a lot of NBA draft coverage this week, and people were saying that the kid that the Cavs took, well, if he develops a jump shot, he could be an all-star. And I'm like, well, I know there are things that you do well to be a ball player, but it seems like in basketball, the thing you need to do to be really good is shoot the basketball, because that's the name of the game. And that's exactly the same thing in baseball. Like, in order to be a good baseball player, you have to be able to hit the baseball. And unfortunately, that is Will Benson's biggest problem. And nobody's going to take him. Like, I'm sure you agree. There's no chance. Mm-hmm. If someone took him in the Rule 5 draft, he's not going to stick on a major league roster for 90 days. Like, he'll run a 60% strikeout rate. That would be something would have to click extremely well for him to make it in a Rule 5 draft this year.
No, I agree. And he's the one guy, like if you could pick one player to just fix one trait or like take one skill and raise it to 40 grade, not even average, just like a click below average. It's like, if you could get that hit tool to just 40 grade where he's going to hit like 220, if you could guarantee me he was going to hit 220 or 210 in the majors, I would say he's a future major leaguer. That's all he needs to get to. I just don't know you can say that yet. Like if he was a 220 hitter with the walks and the power and the potential defense, you're like, okay, great, sign me up. He is a future outfielder for the Indians. So that's why I find him fascinating. And again, easy to root for kid more than anything else. I want him to prove me wrong so much in terms of the profile in the future. It is fun to look through, or not fun, the opposite of fun to think about since 2012, all those outfielders between, it started with Tyler Naquin that year, and then you had Clint Frazier, Bradley Zimmer, Mike Pappy, mentioned Will Benson, Quentin Holmes being their first pick. They made such a run. I'm sure I'm forgetting high pick outfielders. They made such a run, and they still don't have much to show for it. What are the odds that the next great outfielder the Indians producing system is actually Nolan Jones?
That's probably very, very true. I don't think they're going to put him in at third base. Like Jose Ramirez to me doesn't have the body type of a second baseman anymore, and realizes that second base has such a high attrition rate of players now that if the Indians are going to trade Francisco Lindor, like you cannot afford to lose 1% of offensive production from Jose Ramirez. So if you think that you could risk any offensive production slipping from him by moving him to second base, why take that risk? And Jones has the arm for the outfield. Like there's no question about his arm. I think for him, it's just his range and reactions. Like he's a big kid. I think the bat, is likely to play no matter where they put him, right? Like maybe it's a little bit sketchy at first base considering the offensive profile for first baseman because, he's not a Pete Alonso, he's not a Freddie Freeman, but yeah, you're right. I very much think that Lonnie Chisenhall was the best outfielder they've had in a long time, right? If you look at worn production. So you're right. Nolan Jones is probably the next best bet there in right field.
Yeah, I mean, their most productive outfielder they've produced in the last 20 years was Luke Scott. Like that's where the list begins, and it does not obviously doesn't get better if that's where it begins in terms of value. But Ben Francisco for a long time was still fifth on that list. It's not pretty, but I mean, the interesting thing with Nolan Jones was many people predicted he would move to outfield. That was where he was going to go when he was drafted, and they've just kept putting him at third. And as much as Atlanta Braves fans want the Indians to be willing to trade Jose Ramirez, I don't think that is even on the table anywhere, and we could just put that to bed. So Nolan Jones has to go somewhere, and I'm curious to see if he goes in the outfield. Before we run out of time on the show, I did want to ask, the Indians currently, Lindor is everything right now. It's what everyone wants to talk about. Where do you hope he goes? What is we spend a lot of time as writers, sports people, just looking at packages, having people ask us about deals. What is your favorite? What have you looked at and seen? What are the ones, what stood out? Or maybe what's a top 2 or top 3 for you right now?
The two I focused on the most are the Mets. Obviously, they have the biggest needs, right? Like, obviously, the Mets just lost Robinson Cano, so maybe they're motivated to add a hitter to the middle of that lineup. And, the new owner, they want to make a splash, and they're going to keep Sandy Alderson. They're not going to go after Mike Chernoff. And I thought maybe if they hired Mike Chernoff as the president of baseball ops, that might have taken the Mets off the board because, he's going to know Lindor, and he's not going to overpay for him. That Chernoff's going to stay and Alderson's going to stay in New York. Maybe they want to make a big splash, and I think there's a lot of fits there. I mean, you've mentioned a lot of guys. Dominic Smith for one. I'd probably guess Brandon Nimmo's out of their range as far as the trade's concerned, but they have some other interesting guys. I'd love to see Jeff McNeil in Cleveland. I think he's a very favorite target of them, but I think he's out of range a little bit too. And the Angels, the other one. The Angels. Andrelton Simmons is a free agent. They need to do anything they can to put better talent around Mike Trout. And there might even be a better fit if the Indians can give them a pitcher, if they can give them, Tristan McKenzie. Or I hate to say, want Carlos Carrasco. They might be Carrasco and Lindor in a trade together. And I think you could fill, I don't think it's crazy to think that if you package Lindor and McKenzie or Carrasco, that you could get Jo Adell back. I think there's a very possible fit there. I know everyone's got some split opinions on Jo Adell, but that's a possibility, I think. And you can get someone like Luis Rengifo to fill an infield spot. And you know what? They also have an owner that loves to meddle. Their ownership is kind of a mess over there. So if he wants to go out and acquire a star shortstop, he might put an impetus on the new GM to go out and do it and force them to make a bad trade. And that works out for the Indians. I don't think you can rule out ownership getting involved in a trade like that and forcing a bad trade on a very new GM, because a lot of GMs, a lot of people didn't want that job because of the kind of ownership style they have over there. So I would for sure watch out for the Angels because of that situation too.
Maybe a controversial statement for me, but I think the Indians, if they trade with the Angels, Adele wouldn't be their heart's desire. Just looking at the way they pick and develop guys, I feel like they would be asking about Fletcher first and foremost. I feel like they would take a lesser package around Fletcher than Adele, just based on how the Indians scout, develop, and tools they like. That's just I could be totally wrong in this, but we'll see. I agree with you on both those targets, but I wonder if Fletcher would be the big ask by the Indians.
No, I think you're right. I guess I kind of left him off, and Jo Adell's kind of a pipe dream too. I think again you'd have to package a pitcher to get him, but I think I kind of assumed David Fletcher would be even a bigger pipe dream just because he's young and he's controllable and had a great year, and he does have all those traits the Indians like. You're absolutely right. So he would be a fit. I just wonder how much off limits he might be, in addition to Jo Adell. I think more realistically, we both think it's Brandon Marsh, right? Brandon Marsh is probably the guy that makes the most sense. I keep pitching Rengifo because Rengifo's got some David Fletcher skills. He's like, David Fletcher light, I guess.
He's the one who was going to go. He was part of the package for Jock Peterson before that whole mess fell apart, right? Wasn't he the central piece for Jock Peterson and the Angels Peterson deal, I believe?
Yeah, he was supposed to net them both Jock Peterson and Ross Stripling. Like it was Rengifo, and I think there might have been somebody else going in addition to Rengifo, but basically he was the headliner for Jock Peterson and Ross Stripling, which I can't remember why they called that off. I think it had something to do with ownership. To be honest with you.
And there was another, I think it was like Andy Page was another prospect who was also going from the Dodgers. So they were giving up a prospect as well to get Rengifo. And then it got held up because the big deal got held up. And then Moreno's like, no, do it now or don't do it at all. So yeah, it was the meddling where Artie Moreno got mad that deal got held up until the Mookie Betts deal was done because of the medical issue with Grattriel. The only reason I brought up Fletcher is, if they get Lindor and they sign him and they've got Anthony Rendon at third, I know second base has been up and down for them and Fletcher could naturally slot in there, but I think it does slightly leave the door open for it. I'm not saying it's possible, but I do think he is an interesting one. And as everyone knows, I've already talked Mets to death on the podcast. I'll do one more question here. I know we're running long, but people tend to like it when I do that, is when I'm getting in my Twitter comments. So with the Indians' current setup right now, there's this gaping hole at second base, a gaping hole to some degree in center field as well. I have a sinking suspicion we all know who's going to be in center field, but as of now, let's ask about the three big positions. Who do you think is going to be playing, or where do you think they're going to get center field, second base, and shortstop before the season begins?
I guess as of right now in center field, I'd have to pick between Mercado and DeShields.
That's my feel as well.
Yeah, I really think they need to non-tender Naquin. They need to non-tender DeShields. They need to move on. They've already got, 6 other outfielders. Jake Bauers. I know we're getting off. I don't want to get off topic here, but Jake Bauers is out of options in 2021. He's got to be on the big league roster, and you've got to find a home for him and Josh Naylor. They both play the same position, so there's 2 spots in your roster taken up right there between first base and outfield. I don't know how you can roll with Naquin and DeShields and Mercado and Bradley Zimmer and Nolan Jones and Daniel Johnson and Jordan Luplow. It's a mess. But yeah, I would say as of now, it's Mercado and DeShields. Second base, I imagine they'll get an infielder back in the Lindor date. If they go ahead and trade Lindor, they'll get an infielder back and he'll bounce between one of those 2 spots. And maybe you see Yu Chang take the other spot. I think Yu Chang either plays second or short, depending on who comes back in that spot.
I hope you're right. I would like to see him get a chance. I keep leaving him off of lists for shortstop, even though he can totally handle it defensively. I think you and I probably agree there. Like, he's not going to win any awards, but he's at least an average shortstop with an arm. And he's that guy where, I talked about I think he could be like a 220 hitter who walks and has like 20 home runs. Like, if he is 80% of Johnny Peralta, like, I think that could occur. Like, I think he could be like 80% of Johnny Peralta, but with better defense. I hope you're right, at least in that regard, that he does finally get an opportunity. I guess, is there any other player here at the end before I let you go that you want to shine a light on or talk about?
Let me look over my list. I have my list pulled up here. I don't know. We had this discussion on Twitter the other day. I keep going back to Carlos Vargas. They probably won't do it, but I'm going to keep arguing until I'm blue in the face to see if they do it, because, there's a reason they protected him, right? Because they felt like somebody might try to go ahead and nab him and put him in the bullpen to see if it works. But I don't think there's a reason they should rule that out. Like, they might try to keep starting him because they have the depth and they don't need to worry about it. But I just picture a back three of the bullpen of James Karinchak and Emmanuel Clase and Carlos Vargas, nice bullpens in baseball. I would love to see them fast track Vargas to the bullpen, because his delivery is just so there's so much effort to it. I don't see him ever being a starter long term. And I think there's a possibility the fastball and slider are good enough sometime this year to get big league hitters out. If even with, below average command, like his command right now is maybe a stretch at 40. But if he can just control and not walk enough guys, not even hit the glove, just throw it in the zone and let the fastball and slider do what they do naturally. I think he has enough there to do it, but we'll see. That's not something they've done. I know they did it with Karinchak a little bit, but I know they did it with Kyle Crockett and Cody Allen. So I guess there's some precedent, but I would imagine the reason they protected him, right, was because they thought if you're in low A or short season A, nobody's taking that guy to start him in the Rule 5 draft. You're taking him to be a reliever. So they at least think that there's a chance he can do it, right?
And the reports are so strong across the board. Like, yes, I am not his biggest fan. I will admit that. But everyone had him, that the Indians were going to protect him. We all knew that the sure bets were Vargas, Jones, and Arias. I thought Morgan was a very strong bet after them. And then the fifth spot was, we'll see. I mean, I think we all knew Clement could be in play there. But I think that is what's interesting with Vargas is, I mean, he is a known entity. But man, that lack of a year just leaves us all going, it's just hard. We don't know where he's at. We don't know what he's, the ability. We don't know what chances they've had I can't remember if he was one of the guys at alternate side or not. So if he wasn't, then they didn't get to see. I think he's now in the Arizona grouping, so they can see him a bit now, I believe, but I could be wrong there. Top of my head type of talk. So it's, it's a very odd year to be talking prospects. You'll never have another season where we have less information than we have right now.
Yeah, it's rough for what I like to do and what you like to do and the prospect community. Yeah, it was a brutal year. I hope we don't ever have to go through it again. I really don't.
No, I'm trying to put together my draft lists. I'm like, I can't find my deep sleepers because I just don't have enough information to be like, how did I find Nick Gonzalez 3 years ago when there was nothing on the internet about him? I'm like, well, I have data. Let's go through the data and see who's yelling at me. And that was Nick Gonzalez. I can't do that right now. So it's a brutal time for all of us. I want to thank Justin for coming on the show. Again, a long one for Tuesday. No podcast Wednesday or Thursday. We'll be back Friday to talk about any developing news and information. Should be a fun one to listen to on a day off. But again, thank you to Justin. The long one today has to carry you through the next few days. But we had a great guest, a great talk. I hope everyone enjoyed it. Just one more time here at the end. Justin, tell them where to find you.
You can find me on Twitter, jail_baseball, and you can find Indians Baseball Insider, IndiansBaseballInsider.com, and on Twitter at official_IBI.
Thank you for listening. You can find me at Jeff MLB Draft or listen to this podcast on not this week, but most weeks, every single day. And as always, go Tribe.